The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known universe. It floated in the darkness of space above Prime, a massive ring of metal and glass where the fate of billions was decided every day. 47 species sent their leaders here. 47 flags hung from the ceiling. And today, one human stood alone in the center of it all. Ambassador Daniel looked up at the rows of alien faces staring down at him. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no faces at all, just clusters of eyes or sensing organs that watched his every movement. He had spent 3 years learning their languages, their customs, their ways of thinking. He had believed that understanding would lead to friendship. He had been wrong. Chancellor of the Empire rose from his seat at the highest point of the chamber. His gray skin stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for his body. His 4 eyes blinked one at a time as he spoke. The human called Daniel has been found guilty of espionage against the Galactic Council, announced. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. He has been found guilty of conspiracy to overthrow the rightful order of civilized space. The sentence is death. Daniel did not flinch. He had known this moment was coming from the second they arrested him 2 weeks ago. The evidence against him was fake. The trial had lasted only 6 hours. No human lawyer was allowed to speak on his behalf. The council had already decided his fate long before he entered this room. "I am innocent," Daniel said. His voice was calm and clear. "Every species in this chamber knows I am innocent, but I understand now that innocence was never the point." His eyes narrowed. "The human will be silent." "No," Daniel replied. "I will not. You are afraid of us. 12 years ago, humanity sent its first ship beyond our solar system. 12 years. And in that short time, we have grown faster than any species in your records. We learn. We adapt. We do not stop, and that terrifies you." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some of the alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. High Arbiter, a tall being with silver skin and gentle eyes, looked away in shame. She had tried to speak for Daniel during the trial. The council had silenced her. "You see us as a threat," Daniel continued. "So you created this lie. You will kill me to send a message to Earth. You want my people to know their place. You want them to bow down and accept that they will always be lesser." Slammed his fist against his podium. "Enough! Guards, prepare the prisoner for execution." 2 massive soldiers grabbed Daniel by the arms. They began dragging him toward a platform at the edge of the chamber where a device waited. It looked simple enough. A chair, metal restraints, a single beam emitter pointed at the head. Clean and efficient. The council preferred their killings to be tidy. Daniel did not struggle. He walked with his head held high as billions of beings across the galaxy watched the live broadcast. Every human on Earth was watching. Every child, every soldier, every leader. They all saw their ambassador face death with dignity. As the guards strapped him into the chair, Daniel spoke one last time. His words were not for the council. They were for home. "To my people," he said softly, but the microphones carried his voice to every corner of the galaxy. "Do not forget who you are. Do not forget what we can become. They think this will break us. They think we will accept this and stay quiet. But I know you. I know what burns in the heart of every human being. We do not break. We do not bow. And we never forget." The beam emitter hummed to life. A bright light filled the chamber. And then Daniel was gone. Silence fell over the council. Chancellor smiled, satisfied that the message had been sent. The other delegates began filing out, returning to their ships and their worlds, already forgetting the human who had stood before them. But far away, at the edge of explored space, Admiral Laura Price stood frozen on the bridge of her ship. The broadcast had just ended. Her crew stared at blank screens, tears running down some of their faces. Others gripped their consoles with white knuckles, their jaws tight with rage. Laura had served in the military for 25 years. She had seen death before. She had lost friends and soldiers under her command. But this was different. This was not war. This was murder dressed up as justice. And she had been forced to watch, helpless, as the galaxy killed a good man for the crime of being human. "Admiral," her first officer said quietly, "what do we do?" Laura did not answer immediately. She stared at the empty screen where Daniel's face had been moments ago. She remembered meeting him once, at a conference on Earth before he left for Prime. He had been nervous but hopeful. He believed that humanity could find its place among the stars through peace and understanding. He had been wrong, but that did not make him any less brave. "Set a course for Earth," Laura finally said. Her voice was steady, but there was something new in it, something cold. "Send a priority message to all human vessels. Tell them to return home immediately. Tell them what happened here." "And then?" her first officer asked. Laura turned away from the screen. Her eyes were dry now. The tears had burned away, replaced by something harder. "And then," she said, "we remind the galaxy why they should have feared us from the start." On Earth, the broadcast ended. In homes and offices, in military bases and government halls, people sat in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had witnessed pressed down on an entire species. Then the silence broke, not with screams or panic, but with something quieter and far more dangerous. Across the planet, billions of humans looked up at the stars, and in that moment, every single one of them made the same promise. This would not stand. This would never be forgiven, and this would never, ever be forgotten. The age of humanity's patience had ended. The age of humanity's wrath had begun. 3 months had passed since Daniel died. 3 months since the galaxy showed humanity exactly how much their lives were worth. And in those 3 months, everything changed. President Cole stood at the window of his office in Geneva, looking out at a city transformed. Factories that had built cars now built weapons. Universities that had taught philosophy now taught tactics. Children who had dreamed of becoming artists now dreamed of becoming soldiers. The world had united in a way that would have seemed impossible just 1 year ago. There were no more nations, no more borders, no more old hatreds between countries that had fought for centuries. Russians stood shoulder to shoulder with Americans. Chinese worked alongside Europeans. African and Asian and South American, all of them bound together by a single truth. The galaxy wanted them dead, and humanity had decided together to fight back. A knock came at the door. General Amy entered without waiting for an answer. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being the most brilliant tactical mind Earth had ever produced. In her hands, she carried a folder marked with the highest security clearance. "It is time, sir," she said. "The fleet is ready." Turned from the window, "How many?" 200 warships, 50 carriers, 300 support vessels, and that is just the first wave. The numbers would have seemed laughable to the Galactic Council. Their fleets numbered in the thousands. Their empires spanned hundreds of star systems, but knew something the Council did not. Size meant nothing if you did not know how to use it. "And Project Prometheus?" he asked. General allowed herself a small smile. "Doctor sends his regards. The new weapons are installed on every ship. Shield breakers, quantum torpedoes, and the new drive systems. Our ships are now 3 times faster than anything the Council has." Nodded slowly. Project Prometheus had been humanity's deepest secret. For 10 years, ever since the first alien vessel crashed on Earth, scientists had worked in hidden bases around the world. They studied the wreckage. They learned how the technology worked, and then they improved it. The Council believed humans were primitive. They believed humanity had only the basic technology that was sold to them at outrageous prices. They had no idea that behind closed doors, human engineers had been building something new, something better, something designed specifically for war. "The volunteers?" asked. "We had to turn away millions," General replied. "For every position in the fleet, 10 people applied. Everyone wants to fight. Everyone wants to make them pay for what they did. Walked to his desk and picked up a photograph. It showed Daniel at his graduation ceremony, young and hopeful, ready to change the world. They had been friends once, long ago. Daniel had believed that peace was possible, had always been more realistic. Daniel would not have wanted this, said quietly. He believed in diplomacy, in understanding. Daniel is dead, General said. Her voice was not cruel, just honest. He tried their way, he trusted them, and they murdered him for it. We cannot make that mistake again. Set down the photograph. She was right. Daniel's way had failed. Now it was time for humanity's way. Send the order, said. Launch the fleet. 3 hours later, Admiral Laura Price stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Liberty. Through the main, she could see Earth growing smaller as the fleet moved toward the edge of the solar system. 200 ships flew in perfect formation behind her, their hulls gleaming with new armor, their weapons primed and ready. She pressed a button on her console, opening a channel to every ship in the fleet. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer would hear her words. "This is Fleet Admiral Price," she began. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council murdered Ambassador Daniel. They killed him because they were afraid of what we could become. They thought his death would teach us to accept our place at the bottom of their order. They thought wrong. She paused, letting her words sink in. Today, we leave our home behind. We go to face an enemy that has ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They have more ships than us. They have more soldiers. They have more experience. But they do not have what we have. On every ship, crew members leaned forward, listening. They do not have our will, Laura continued. They do not have our rage, and they do not have 300 years of human warfare to draw upon. They have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. We have never forgotten. It is written in our blood. It is carved into our history. We are the species that crawled out of caves and conquered our world. We are the species that split the atom and touched the moon. And now, we are the species that will teach the galaxy what happens when you push us too far. She straightened her spine and spoke the final words. Remember Daniel, remember what they did to him, and make them remember it too. The channel closed. Across the fleet, soldiers and sailors looked at each other with new fire in their eyes. Fear was still there, buried deep, but something stronger had risen above it: determination, purpose, and a cold, burning need for justice. The fleet reached the edge of the solar system. The stars stretched before them, countless and uncaring. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council went about their business, confident in their power, certain that the troublesome humans had learned their lesson. They had no idea what was coming. Admiral Price gave the final command. All ships, engage jump drives, set course for the border. It is time to introduce ourselves properly. The fleet vanished in a flash of light, leaving Earth behind. The war had begun. Back on Earth, President Cole stood alone in his office. He had just watched the fleet disappear into the darkness of space. Billions of people had watched with him, their hearts filled with hope and fear in equal measure. He thought about the future. The war would be long, many would die. The cost would be terrible beyond imagination. But there was no other choice. The galaxy had shown humanity that peace was not an option. Survival meant war, and humans had always been very good at war. Looked up at the stars one last time. "Forgive us, Daniel," he whispered, "but they left us no other way." The night sky held no answers, only the cold light of distant suns, waiting for humanity to claim them. Warlord had conquered 17 worlds in his lifetime. He had crushed rebellions, destroyed fleets, and burned cities to ash. For 200 years, he had served the Empire as its greatest military commander. No enemy had ever stood against him and lived. So when the Council ordered him to destroy the human fleet, he laughed. 500 ships against 200 primitive vessels, he said to his officers aboard the flagship. This is not war. This is pest control. We will be home before the next cycle." His officers laughed with him. They had all seen the reports on humans, weak bodies, short, a species that had only left their home planet 12 years ago. How could such creatures possibly threaten an empire that had ruled for? They were about to find out. The two fleets met at the drift, a field of asteroids and dust clouds at the edge of Council space. Admiral Laura Price had chosen this location carefully. The Council ships were larger and more heavily armed, but they were also slower and less agile. In open space, they would have the advantage. In the chaos of an asteroid field, that advantage would disappear. "All ships maintain formation," Laura ordered from the bridge of the Liberty. "Do not fire until my command." Commander Bate Taylor stood beside her, watching the enemy fleet approach on the tactical display. 500 red dots moved toward them in a perfect wedge formation. The standard Council attack pattern, exactly what they had expected. "They are not even trying to flank us," Bate observed. "They think this will be easy." "Good," Laura replied. "Let them think that." On the other side of the battlefield, Warlord gave the order to attack. His ships surged forward, weapons charging, confident in their overwhelming numbers. The humans sat still, not even trying to run. Perhaps they had accepted their fate. Perhaps they were frozen with fear. Either way, this would be over quickly. Then the asteroids began to explode. The humans had spent weeks preparing the battlefield. They had hidden mines in the asteroids, planted explosives in the dust clouds, and positioned strike teams in places the Council would never think to look. As the fleet charged forward, the trap was sprung. Hundreds of explosions ripped through the Council formation. Ships that had been flying in perfect order suddenly found themselves dodging debris and fire from every direction. Shields flickered and failed. Hulls cracked open, and before could understand what was happening, a dozen of his ships were already gone. "What is this?" he roared. "Where is this coming from?" His officers had no answer. The humans had not moved from their position. They were just sitting there, watching the chaos unfold. Then they attacked. The human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups, each one moving with speed and precision that the Council had never seen before. They did not fly in neat formations like proper warships. They darted and weaved like angry insects, striking from unexpected angles, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. Lieutenant Park led a squadron of fighters through the heart of the fleet. His small ship was faster than anything the enemy had, and he used every bit of that speed. He dove between massive battleships, firing at their weak points, and disappeared before they could react. "Target the engine ports," he called to his squadron. "Take out their mobility first." One by one, Council ships began to drift. Without engines, they became sitting targets. Human destroyers moved in and finished them off with concentrated fire. The fleet, so confident minutes ago, was falling apart. Warlord watched in disbelief as his command ship shook from another impact. This was not possible. These were primitives. These were lesser beings. How could they be winning? "Fall back," he ordered. "Regroup and reform the line." But the humans gave them no chance to recover. Admiral Price had studied Council tactics for years. She knew they relied on formation and overwhelming force. She knew they had never faced an enemy that fought like humans did. "Captain Miller," she said into her communicator, "execute attack pattern Delta." Captain Miller grinned from the cockpit of his destroyer. He had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Understood, Admiral. Going in." His ship broke away from the main fleet and accelerated toward the flagship at full speed. Defense batteries tried to track him, but he was too fast, his movements too unpredictable. He dodged and spun through a storm of laser fire, getting closer with every second. At the last moment, just as it seemed he would crash directly into his bridge, Miller hit the ejection button. His escape pod launched clear as his destroyer slammed into the flagship's command section at full velocity. The explosion lit up the asteroid field like a new sun. Warlord, conqueror of 17 worlds, died without ever understanding how he had lost. The destruction of the flagship broke what remained of Council morale. Ships began retreating in disorder, no longer fighting but simply trying to survive. The humans let some of them go. They wanted survivors. They wanted witnesses. 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. The Galactic Council had lost over 300 ships. Humanity had lost 22. Admiral Price looked at the field of debris floating before her. Scattered among the wreckage were the bodies of thousands of Council soldiers. She felt no joy at the sight, only grim satisfaction. "Send a message to Earth," she ordered. "Tell them we have won the first battle. Tell them this is only the beginning." Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Council's unbeatable fleet had been shattered by a species that had joined the galactic community just 12 years ago. Impossible, unthinkable, and yet undeniably true. On 100 worlds, Council citizens watched footage of the battle. They saw human ships moving with terrifying speed. They saw the greatest military commander in history die in a ball of fire. They saw something they had never seen before. They saw what happened when you made humanity angry. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council knew fear. In her quarters that night, Admiral Price looked at a photograph of Daniel, the same photograph that hung in every ship in the fleet. "First blood, Daniel," she whispered, "but not the last, not until they pay for everything." The stars outside her window held no comfort, only the promise of more battles to come. And Laura Price was ready for every single one of them. 5 years of war had changed the galaxy forever. Rear Admiral Miller stood on the observation deck of his flagship, looking down at the planet below. Once, this world had been a thriving Council colony. Now it was a battlefield. Smoke rose from burning cities. Flashes of light marked ongoing ground combat, another world falling into human hands. He was not the same man who had crashed his ship into Warlord's flagship 5 years ago. That man had been young and eager, driven by rage and a desire for revenge. The man who stood here now was tired. He had seen too much death. He had ordered too many soldiers to their graves, but he had not stopped fighting. None of them had. The war had spread across dozens of star systems. Human fleets struck at Council supply lines, captured resource planets, and destroyed shipyards wherever they found them. The Council, still unable to believe that primitives could challenge them, kept sending fleets to crush the rebellion, and those fleets kept dying. But humanity paid a price too. For every Council soldier that fell, human soldiers fell as well. For every victory, there were losses that could never be recovered. Names that would never be spoken again except on memorial walls that grew longer each month. Major Grace led her troops through the ruins of what had once been a beautiful city. Her unit specialized in planetary assault, and they had become very good at their job. Too good sometimes. She tried not to think about the lives she had ended. She tried to focus on the lives she was saving. "Major," one of her soldiers called out, "we found them." Grace moved forward and saw what her troops had discovered. A group of aliens huddled in the basement of a collapsed building. But these were not enemy soldiers. They were civilians, workers, families, and they looked at her with pure terror in their eyes. She knelt down and held up her hands to show she meant no harm. "We are not here to hurt you," she said in their language. 3 years of fighting on their worlds had taught her to speak it well enough. "The battle is over. You are safe now." One of the aliens, an older female with trembling hands, looked at her with confusion. "Why?" she asked. "We are your enemies. Why would you spare us?" Grace thought about the question. She thought about Daniel and how he had died. She thought about all the rage that had driven humanity to war. And she thought about what they were fighting for. "Because we are not like them," she finally answered. "We fight soldiers. We do not murder civilians. That is the difference between us and the council that killed our ambassador." Word of human mercy spread across council space. It spread through whispers and secret messages, through refugees who had expected death and found compassion instead. And slowly, something began to change. The remnant was born in the shadows, a coalition of species who had suffered under council rule for centuries, species who had been conquered, enslaved, and forgotten. They saw in humanity something they had lost long ago: hope. At first, the remnant provided only small things: intelligence about council movements, safe places for human ships to hide and repair, supplies that mysteriously appeared when they were needed most. But as the years passed, their support grew bolder. Fleet Admiral Laura Price received word of each new ally with grim satisfaction. The Council had built its empire on fear and domination. Now that foundation was cracking. Species that had obeyed for were beginning to question. And every time they looked at humanity, they asked themselves the same question: if these newcomers could stand against the Council, why could they not do the same? The Council tried everything to stop the bleeding. They sent assassins to kill human leaders. Admiral Price survived 3 attempts on her life. They built to destroy Earth itself. Human intelligence networks discovered each plot before it could succeed. They offered peace treaties with generous terms. Earth responded with the same answer every time: surrender those responsible for Daniel, or the war continues forever. Chancellor had inherited leadership of the Council after died of illness in the 2nd year of the war. Unlike his predecessor, understood that the Council was losing. He secretly reached out to human diplomats, offering real peace, real change, a chance to end the bloodshed. For 3 weeks, negotiations continued in secret. Some in the human government began to hope that an end was possible. Then was found dead in his chambers, killed by Council who refused to surrender. The war continued. President Cole addressed Earth on the 5th anniversary of Daniel's death. His hair had turned gray. His face showed the weight of every decision he had made. But his voice was still strong. "5 years ago they took one of our own," he said. "They thought we would accept it. They thought we would bow. They were wrong. Today we control more territory than we did a year ago. Today our allies number in the dozens. Today the galaxy knows that humanity does not break." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Some ask how long this war will last. I will tell you the truth. It will last as long as it must. If we must fight for 10 years, we will fight for 10 years. If we must fight for 100 years, we will fight for 100 years. We did not choose this war, but we will finish it." Across human space, soldiers listened to his words. They were tired. They were far from home. They had lost friends and loved ones. But they did not waver, because they knew that going back was not an option. The Council had taught them that lesson with Daniel's death. There was no peace with enemies who killed the innocent. There was only victory or extinction. On a distant space station, a young Council child asked their parent when the war would end. The parent had no answer. Outside their window, a human fleet jumped into the system, weapons charged and ready. The war was not over. The war might never be over. But humanity would keep fighting until the very last star burned out. And somewhere in the void, Rear Admiral Miller gave the order to begin another assault. Another world, another battle, another step toward the final reckoning. "Remember Daniel," he said to his crew. They remembered. They would always remember. 10 years to the day since Daniel died, the human fleet arrived at Prime. Grand Admiral Laura Price stood on the bridge of the Liberty, the same ship she had commanded since the war began. Her hair was white now. Her face carried the scars of a decade of combat, but her eyes still burned with the same fire that had ignited on the day she watched an innocent man die. Before her, floated the massive ring of the Galactic Council chamber, the place where it all began, the place where humanity's ambassador had been murdered while the galaxy watched. Now, 1,000 human warships surrounded it, along with 500 vessels from allied species who had joined their cause. They had fallen one by one over the past year. Their fleets were gone. Their armies were broken. Only a handful of leaders remained, hiding in the very chamber where they had once passed judgment on lesser species. Admiral, her communications officer, reported, "They are requesting to negotiate." Laura almost laughed. After 10 years of war, after millions of deaths on both sides, after every peace offering had been rejected, now they wanted to talk. "Open a channel," she ordered. The face that appeared on screen was old and afraid. High Arbiter, the same judge who had tried to speak for Daniel at his trial. She had survived the war by hiding her sympathy for humanity. Now she was one of the few council leaders still alive. Grand Admiral Price said, "The council wishes to discuss terms of surrender." "There is nothing to discuss," Laura replied. "You will open the station, you will release all prisoners, and you will prepare the remaining council leaders for trial, real trial, not the kind you gave Daniel." Lowered her head, "It will be done." 1 hour later, human marines stormed through the corridors of Prime. They met no resistance. The guards had already surrendered. The leaders who had once ruled the galaxy now sat in chains, waiting for judgment. Lieutenant Commander Daniel II walked among the Marines. He was 32 years old now. He had been 22 when his father died. 10 years of war had turned him from a grieving son into a decorated officer. He had fought in dozens of battles. He had killed more enemies than he could count. And now he stood in the room where his father had taken his last breath. The execution platform was still there. The council had kept it as a monument to their power. Daniel stood before it for a long moment, saying nothing. The Marines around him waited in respectful silence. "Take it apart," he finally said. "Every piece. We will bring it back to Earth, build something better in its place." Ambassador arrived the next day to handle the formal surrender. He was young, chosen specifically because he reminded people of Daniel, calm, thoughtful, willing to see the good in others, even after everything that had happened. The surviving council leaders were brought before him in the same chamber where they had condemned humanity's first ambassador. They expected death. They had ordered the deaths of so many others. Surely the humans would do the same to them. Looked at them for a long time before speaking. "You killed Daniel because you were afraid of what humanity could become," he said. "You were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons you thought. You believed we would conquer the galaxy. You believed we would become tyrants like you. You were wrong." He stepped closer to the prisoners. "We could execute you. By your own laws, you deserve it. You murdered an innocent man. You started a war that killed millions. Justice would be served if we ended your lives right here, right now." The council leaders trembled. Some closed their eyes, waiting for the end. "But we are not you," continued. "We did not fight this war to become monsters. We fought it to prove that monsters could be defeated. So you will live. You will be exiled to a world at the edge of known space. You will spend the rest of your lives watching the galaxy move on without you. You will see everything you built be replaced by something better. And you will know every day until you die that humanity chose mercy when you chose murder." The council leaders were taken away. Some wept. Some screamed. Some simply stared in disbelief. They had expected vengeance. They had received something far more painful. They had received proof that they had been wrong about humanity all along. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Alliance was formally dissolved. In its place rose a new federation, built on principles that would have made Daniel proud. Every species was equal. Every voice mattered. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not as conquerors but as guardians of a new order. Grand Admiral Price announced her retirement on the day the Federation was founded. She had given everything to the war. Now it was time to rest. Her final log entry was broadcast across human space. 12 years ago, we reached for the stars and found an enemy waiting for us. 10 years ago, we went to war because we had no other choice. Today, we have one. But I do not feel victory. I feel exhaustion. I feel grief for all those we lost. And I feel hope that maybe, finally, we can build something worth fighting for. She paused, her voice growing softer. Remember Daniel, not for how he died, but for what he believed. He believed that understanding could bridge any gap. He was killed for that belief. But today, as I look at the Federation we have built, I think perhaps he was right after all. It just took longer than any of us expected. On the anniversary of his death, 10 years to the day, a memorial was unveiled at Prime. Representatives from 100 species attended the ceremony. Human and alien stood side by side, united in a way that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. A human child, no more than 6 years old, tugged on their parent's sleeve. "Who was Daniel?" the child asked. The parent smiled sadly and pointed to the statue at the center of the memorial. It showed a man standing tall, his face calm, his eyes looking toward the stars. "He was the first," the parent answered. "He went out into the galaxy alone, hopping to make friends. They killed him for it. But because of him, we are here. Because of him, we will never be alone again." The child looked up at the statue and smiled. They did not fully understand. They had been born after the war ended. They would grow up in a galaxy at peace. And that, perhaps, was Daniel's greatest victory of all. The stars shone bright above Prime. A new age had begun.